Welcome to the Executive Coaching Podcast, where Executive Coach Alicia Cowan will discuss leadership topics and coaching solutions to tackle the most difficult problems that keep you from leading your team to success.
Hey there, senior leaders. It's Alicia Cowan, and welcome to the Executive Coaching Podcast. We are on episode number 57. As I'm recording this, it's mid-January, and it has been an atypical start to the year. I'll tell you that. Everything that's happened, I think, in New Orleans with the storms, the winter storms, and parts of the country that don't normally get them, and the fires that are happening on the West Coast in California, it's just been coming in with just lots of things happening in this new year. So my thoughts are with everybody that has been impacted or been infected. And it's just been kind of a weird vibe this start of this year. But for us, as we get back into the routine of things, it's been busy with kids and all the things that are happening with their activities. So no rest for the weary here. We were at a swim meet all last weekend. My son switched over from a less competitive league to a more competitive league this year and had his first official meet. And then this weekend, we are actually headed off to New Orleans, and we're going to be going for a cheer competition for the long Martin Luther King weekend. So that's how we'll be celebrating. So today, what we're going to talk about in this episode is we're going to dive in even deeper into the annual performance review topic that I've been covering since, let's say December, really, because we know it's the time of year, typically when you're on a calendar year cycle for those performance review conversations. And really, these topics that I'm going to talk about, they really can be applied to the annual performance review and feedback conversations. I know from talking to you over years and years of questions and concerns and really like a lot of curiosity around how to tackle what we would call and sometimes label a difficult conversation. And typically it surrounds feedback and delivering feedback. And so I'm going to tackle today some of the typical questions that I've gotten over the years, and some pro tips and best practices that I have gathered over the years. And so this is kind of like a culmination of all of that information that I've had. And again, the last couple episodes I've talked about annual performance reviews. 2 episodes, it was like how to prep for them and how to do it as a senior leader when you're prepping both yourself and your team for performance reviews. The last one, we really dug deeper into the conversation and talked about, some of the things that hold us back and how to build those habits of delivering really great feedback. And so today it's more just like this, kind of culmination about everything into tips and best practices, like I said. So that's the topic for today. We're going to explore, some of those challenges, and I'm going to share with you all my insights from being an HR professional and being a coach, and we're just going to dive right in here. So let's start. So I want to start with just some overall tips, tricks, and best practices. So these are just general guidelines and suggestions for these performance or feedback conversations that you have. So we talked about in the last episode, like creating a really clear agenda for yourself. And I'm going to go back to that. I'm going to say what was really helpful is to go through and to have a great agenda for yourself and to be able to stick to it. In that last episode, we talked about really getting the emotions out of the conversation and getting down to the root, like the core facts and the core pieces of feedback that you want to deliver, and the questions that you have that you'd like to ask. And what you want to do is focus on those goals of that conversation. And that's the best way I would say advise on how to prepare. And then when you get in the conversation, the next tip I would have is to absolutely stay present in that conversation. A lot of times when we get into these high stakes conversations, we're going to get urges. We're going to have like the sense of urgency to kind of speed through it. And especially if we feel like it's going to be potentially emotional or high stakes, we want to just like rush through and get to the end. So I'm going to advise you, breathe, keep a very steady pace and just ground yourself in the moment. Slow things down so that you can really stay present and focus on the value of that conversation. The third tip that I'm going to have is if emotions do escalate, I want you to think about maintaining your composure. You do not need to match the emotions of whoever you are engaging with. This will help set the tone and keep the conversation productive and on the right track. And if you need to, it is okay to pause and either just, again, pause the conversation and stay in it, and or potentially if it gets to the point it's not productive, it's okay to revisit the conversation at a later date. Okay. And then big tip here, ask questions. Curiosity is a great feeling to have when you go into these conversations. And you can ask the associate what's their takeaways, what behaviors are they ready to shift, and what support they might need for your success, for their success. And I think this is a great, again, these are great tips for you to coach your team on as well. Sometimes as senior leaders, we've delivered tons of reviews in our lifetime, and those around us, though, haven't. And so sometimes it's really helpful to remind and to coach your leaders on how to do this really well. And so building that curiosity as that leadership skill is so invaluable at this point of feedback delivery. And if you approach that conversation with that genuine interest point, you're really going to foster that sense of like collaboration and trust between yourself and the associate. And teaching that behavior with your teams is huge. So those are kind of just my overarching tips for feedback delivery and performance review delivery. But let's get into some of the typical questions that I get. So the main questions that I get are typically around how to handle emotional reactions from the associate that is receiving the feedback. And so one that I always get is the question around like, what if I'm receiving this feedback and they want to quit as a result? And so my answer to this is, I think the important part here is to start by just simply listening and getting super curious. I'm going to keep coming back to some of these core tips over and over again because they really work, but really listening and understanding, because sometimes this reaction will stem from just this bottled up sense of emotion and perhaps a lack of consistent feedback through the year. Sometimes people are hearing some of this feedback first heard, or they've just been like under pressure, and it just comes out because of the sense of anxiety that they've held on to all year. And the review process can be pretty nerve-wracking for some people sometimes. And so I think the core here, you can reassure them. You can ask them open-ended questions to uncover what their concerns are. And again, use this as an opportunity to build trust between you and this associate and communicate. And one pro tip here, regular check-ins can prevent feedback from piling up and triggering this surprise or overwhelm. And I think regular feedback builds the muscle on both ends of this conversation. It builds the muscle for the person delivering it, and it builds up the muscle of the person receiving it. And then we don't get to this point where the annual performance review is such a high stakes conversation. A lot of times that is what I hear. If it is so built up that it gets to this point, then it can potentially be an indicator of this lack of consistency with feedback throughout the year. All right. So another one I get, a similar question and similar vein of what if the associate gets emotional during the conversation? And my answer here is, and emotions can range. And so when we're saying emotional, it can range from anger and to sadness and maybe defensiveness. So there's the broad range of reactions that people can have. So I mentioned this again, the top of the podcast, there's a couple of ways to handle it. Number one, if the conversation becomes unproductive, meaning if someone is in an overwhelmed position, they're overwhelmed in their brain, they're overwhelmed with emotion, it is not productive to continue the conversation and to push through it. Typically, trying to and reason through it when someone is overly emotional, it just doesn't work. It's our brain doesn't even allow it, right? So it is okay to just pause. And sometimes you can just pause in the conversation and then allow the emotion to process and work through it. But other times it might be okay to revisit it at a later time when the emotions have subsided. Okay. You got to get that brain back to being regulated and to calm down. And it's okay. You just got to follow through on that promise to reconnect. Okay. So it's up to you. I think you have to recognize that and know that there's no failure in doing having the pause. There's no reason that this conversation's gone wrong, right? Everything's fine. You just got to like revisit it at a later date. Okay. The next piece of this that I would say is it's okay to show empathy without mirroring their emotions. So I think a lot of times people want to feel insensitive if somebody's sad and they're not sad, or some people would get defensive if the other person's defensive. And I think it's okay to like, you can be empathetic, you can be saying curiosity without like matching that emotion. And so, for instance, if they become defensive, it's okay to stay calm and very steady. If they're sad, it's okay to offer your compassion, but still remain composed in that moment. So again, just remember, you don't have to be a robot through this. You don't have to be so stoic and unaffected, but you don't have to also like match and go to that state that they're in order to be empathetic with where they're at. And so as an executive coach, this is a lot of what I do and how I help leaders practice, like, and help them practice their emotional intelligence when they need to navigate these conversations with a level of confidence, like knowing that they can go into it and show up in a way that feels good to them. And I also can help support leaders in like crafting this feedback and their delivery style that really helps foster the growth and the trust rather than this like sense of defensiveness or high stakes emotion. All right. Now let's get into a couple of more specific scenarios with associates. Again, still going through this Q&A type of content. A lot of times I'll get asked this question for high performers, and they'll want to know, like, what happens if the associate wants a promotion in this performance review conversation, but you're not prepared to deliver a promotion at this point in time, for whatever reason that may be. And so this is where I would advocate you have to be honest about the associate's readiness, and you have to align what their readiness is and their aspirations for what they'd like to do with what the company needs and the reality of the situation and where they're at. Okay. If it's to them and they're not ready, you have to be able to be super clear and really give them specific development opportunities and a potential timeline for reassessment. Now, I say a potential timeline for reassessment, not a potential timeline for promising a promotion timeline. I say that because no matter what, no matter how senior you are in the organization, there are times, unless you are a complete owner of the company and you control everything, every decision, then I caution you against providing a timeline, because I've seen this backfire in so many instances. I've even seen it when people haven't promised a timeline, but people have their timeline built in their head and they get disappointed because of that expectation. So I think it's really important to be realistic. And if the company is not in a position to offer a promotion, again, I think it's also important to be very transparent about the situation, as transparent as you can be as a senior leader. Okay. So what that means is you've got to be clear without disclosing company information that you are not allowed to. But I think it's important to be super crystal clear on like where the company stands, because just because somebody is ready for a promotion doesn't mean the company financially or from an org structure is ready to take on that elevated position. May not need it, may not have in the budget, all those things. And so I think you can focus on other ways in which they can grow. So whatever the options are to take on micro projects or skills that they need to develop, or leadership experiences they might need to have, exposure to different people, et cetera. And you can just reinforce like, what is your commitment to them and what is their value within the organization and what is their potential long-term career development. All right. And the next one that I hear very frequently is, what if they want to negotiate their compensation? Totally normal for people to bring up compensation during their annual review. A lot of times people wait until their annual review to understand where they stand in terms of their supervisor and what the feedback is and how they view their performance. And then they decide how or when they're going to approach about their pay. So again, as a senior leader, you may not have the answer in that moment about if a pay raise is feasible or not. So I think it's okay to get curious and ask them what they're looking for and why they feel that their value is representative of that level of compensation. And if you don't have the answer in the moment, just let them know when you're going to get back with them. And, of course, you may need to discuss it with your compensation team, your HR team, your supervisor, et cetera, and then get back to them. And then if a pay raise isn't feasible, I think it's okay to discuss like what alternatives are there. If there are things that you can offer and things that you can provide, again, discussing it with the team that supports you, you can think through those things and provide those things, and then frame the conversation around what the mutual goals and their contributions are to the company. All right. The next question I have is typically when new information comes up during the review. So sometimes as a supervisor, you get this question of like, hey, this is a big factor in performance or something you may not have known about the team. And they bring forward this information that you're like, this is first heard from me. And it might impact your thoughts about the performance review or the associate. And so if the associate shares new information that did impact their performance and it's first heard, I think it's important, again, I'm going to say it again, get curious, listen, and assess what they're telling you. So something as an example could be like a personal challenge that might have occurred. Maybe it's team dynamics and how they're working with colleagues and what's been going on. Or maybe there's like a workplace barrier that you just didn't know existed. And so I would use that conversation as a springboard to address these issues and provide the support where possible. Get curious and don't be afraid to lean into this conversation if they're bringing forth something that you didn't know about. All right. So pro tip here. So senior leaders, again, you should view these conversations as opportunities just to mentor and to guide your team. And the ability to provide honest and constructive feedback while still demonstrating that sense of empathy, it's going to build a massive amount of credibility with your team and strengthen that overall relationship and broader team culture and dynamic. Okay. So doing this well, building this muscle is imperative. Okay. So final thoughts for you and some takeaways that I would have for you. So overall tips for senior executives. Okay. Number one, set the stage for team success. Okay. So whether it is your team or the broader organization, it's up to you to create culture and create culture of continuous feedback throughout the year in a way that is supportive of the overall company goals. These annual reviews that associates receive should just be a summary of the year. It should be a gift to the associate. It should be something that is not a surprise, and associates should be appreciative of the conversation because it is not something that catches them off guard, and they should feel motivated and inspired by it. So for you as a senior leader, I think not only supporting your team and coaching them through it, but thinking about how you influence the entire organization and what you want that review process to look like and how you want the culture to be impacted. The next tip to close this out is to just EQ is such a massive thing. So leading with empathy is huge when delivering feedback or delivering reviews. So again, whether it's your team that you are leading or influencing within the organization, let people know how to approach all of these conversations as an opportunity to learn about the team member's perspective. Great way to be empathetic and to hear is to lead with curiosity and to go in with a very open mind and think about listening and asking a lot of questions more than you think about speaking. 3, be transparent. When tough decisions or limitations come up and arise, it's okay. Communicate openly and honestly, and as transparent as you can be. Because I get it. If you're a senior leader, you cannot disclose anything and everything. So I always say, I'm going to be as transparent as my position will allow. Okay. And so I think that clarity and the honesty will help build trust with your team. Again, coach your team to do this. A lot of leaders get stuck when they are pressed and they feel like their back's up against a wall. They start to start to say things or share things that they maybe shouldn't, because they get under pressure and they don't know, how to handle some of these tough conversations. So again, coaching your team on how to be transparent, but not overly transparent, is really important. And so knowing what is okay to share and what is not, in order to make sure that associates feel like they can trust you and they know. And they understand why you might be withholding information in order to, again, to honor your position and honor confidentiality within the company. Okay. And then last but not least, the 4th tip, just stay solution oriented. I think in performance review conversations, feedback conversations, it's important to focus on coming to an agreed upon set of actions and next steps. So whether it's the professional development or addressing challenges or mapping out a path to promotion, it's important to end the conversation on a constructive, inspiring note. And that's not always easy to do. Again, so whether it's you with your team, whether it's you influencing the culture across the company, coach people on how to have really productive conversations. And even if you're delivering information that people aren't thrilled to hear, not everyone loves to hear constructive feedback, it is possible to do it in a way that's inspiring. So in closing, performance reviews and feedback are more than just another thing to check off the to-do list or just a task that you have scheduled on your calendar. They're a chance for you and your broader teams to inspire, to align, to grow as a team. And as always, if you found this content helpful, I'd be so happy to hear from you and for you to share it with your network or your direct reports and your team. I would love to continue the conversation with you. So one, I will talk to you on the next episode, but also if you need help with any of this, I coach leaders one-on-one with supporting them through delivering feedback and leading their teams, as well as I coach groups on delivering feedback and talking through how to be a very strong people leader that can deliver powerful feedback. If you want to reach out to me, the best place to do that is my website. It's EliciaCowan.coaching.com. It's ElisiaKeown coaching.com. And as always, thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Executive Coaching Podcast with Alicia Cowan. If you're ready to have an executive coach who's ready to help you lead your team to success, then book an introductory call at aliciacowancoaching.com/call.